Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Breakout Session D4, Rethinking Meat, American Menus. How do we know what we know? Which will be a continued conversation with our panelists that were just on the main stage. I'm sure there's a lot more to chat about. I know there were some questions in the chat there that we didn't have time to get to, so hopefully you can come here and ask the same questions. We're going to get started in just a minute. I see a couple more people trickling in here. And so I'll give you just a minute to get settled. And again, this is Breakout Session D4, Rethinking Meat. So hopefully you enjoyed the conversation on the main stage. We look forward to having you here. And with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator back to the stage, Sandy Lamont, medical producer for CNN.
Nice to be here. Thanks. And I hope everyone is joining us from our other session that we just finished. We're talking with Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard, Dr. Christopher Gardner from Stanford, and Dr. David Katz from the True Health Initiative. And they'll be here with us in just a moment. And I think folks are popping in now. There you are. We're waiting on Dr. Gardner at this point. Okay. There we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So we left off with the other and started to answer Ken's question about what are some of the best ways to influence the culture of consuming, red meat, of our culture. I have a question about that actually, that has to do with the fact that, when I was looking at some of the data that the Culinary Institute had put forward, they were talking, it was very obvious that women were more likely to be willing to eat plant-forward foods than men. That's such a stereotype, meat and potatoes for the guys. Is that really true today? And is there some way that we can make things more, plant-based food more manly, if that's what's needed?
Sandy, Christopher, I don't know that you were there, but I don't. Both Walter and I had cameo appearances in the documentary "The Game Changers." Mm-hmm. And yes. It's a direct response to this question. So it's a documentary backed by James Cameron, among others. The person who narrates it is basically trains the military elite around the world in hand-to-hand combat. I mean, he's an absolute beast. And it's all about ultra elite athletes in every imaginable discipline, men and women, who are exclusively plant powered. So we're not just talking plant forward. These are people who prove that you can have a plant exclusive diet and be, for instance, the world's strongest man. And actually the guy featured in the movie who lifts and carries more weight than any human in history, it sort of jokes about the fact that, he's been asked, how can you be as strong as an ox and not eat meat? And his response is, have you ever seen an ox eat meat? All right, so we're privileged, we humans, in that we are omnivores. That means we have choices. So we can make good choices. We can think about the environment. We can think about ethics. We can think about health. But there's no question you can be at, the absolute elite, in terms of strength or endurance or, anything you like in terms of athletic performance. You can fuel it exclusively with plants. And of course, you can fuel it with a combination of both. But certainly there's no impediment to an optimal diet based on, power, strength, manliness. That's really just a cultural anachronism. It's time to abandon it and move on.
I'm old enough to remember the real men eat quiche movement.
Real men don't eat quiche, right?
No, it was a counter thing, right? Real men do eat quiche. So do we need more of those messages? And how can teachers help us with that?
Real men eat salads.
Dr. Willett, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I don't know how David felt about that film, but I can't understand
why
Arnold
what's up with that?
Yeah, we did.
Personally offended.
Oh, I was just saying that I don't know how Dr. Katz felt about that film, but yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger got a lot more screen time than we did, who's also a vegan. So it's a pretty, at a minimum, entertaining food, but actually some important
messages. Gentlemen, we have a question
as well.
And
I think one important point here that, just one important point here that I think what we're describing, a plant-forward diet, or others have called this a flexitarian way of eating, we're not saying eliminate red meat, but keep it intake modest and replace it with healthy, tasty alternatives. We did a check. We were doing this international report, the Eat Lancet Commission, to just see if our numbers of about half a serving of red meat per day, that's half an ounce per day, which comes out to be about 1 serving per week. Or if you like big juicy steaks or 12-ounce steak once a month, how that fit with other traditional diets. And it fit very well with a traditional Mediterranean diet that has been studied extensively for healthfulness, that people there have been eating for thousands of years until recently, a plant-forward diet or a flexitarian diet that we know is wonderful, tasty. And it's the amounts of red meat plus poultry were very much on the order that we're talking about here. It's definitely when they weren't vegan, but having modest amounts of these foods. And so there's a lot of flexibility here.
Sandy, you seem to
You're
be
muted, Sandy. Maybe somebody.
I was trying to mute in case I was causing some of the issues there, but I made myself a problem. So what can chefs do with their menus? Is there a way that they can name things certain ways? I mean, what does science tell us that actually tends to help consumers with changing their minds about things? I know with kids, for example. Yep. Go ahead, Dr. Gardner.
So we actually did a naming study in dining halls in universities. So a spin-off of Menus of Change is the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. It was published in Psychological Science last year. We actually had chefs across 6 different universities take a set of 17 different vegetables that they served. So instead of less red meat, this was more vegetables. Oh, I'm not sure if I want a vegetable, it looks bland. So we actually named the vegetables 3 different ways to be overly simplistic. So either high fiber or low sodium, that was a health name, or just carrots, or twisted citrus glazed carrots. And we monitored how many servings the students took. They took more of the twisted citrus glazed carrots, which you might have expected, but the twist was the recipe never changed. It was always the same recipe. We only changed the naming. And the shocking thing was that compared to just carrots and the plain name, the students took 25% less of the vegetable if it said low sodium, high fiber. So branding it as healthy had an adverse effect. They sort of, so we've disassociated health and taste. And so the chefs can help us partly with naming and partly just using their craft to make these things taste unapologetically delicious. But beyond taste, part of it is naming. Part of it is presentation. So I really do think the chefs have a huge role to help us get rid of this old misnomer that healthy foods don't taste good.
Some of the questions in our audience. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Willett.
Yeah. Well, just to add to that, there was a very nice randomized study done in the University of Cambridge, UK, that came out a couple of months ago. And what they showed was, again, just very subtly having 2 instead of 1 plant-based protein source on the menu, entree menu, very substantially increased the number of people who chose a plant-based entree. Because it just makes sense that it's more likely that you'll see something that you like, and of course naming helps on top of that. So there's very simple things, again, without any health messages, that can make an important impact.
A number of the questions that we have in our queue here are talking about, some of them don't necessarily agree with everything we're talking about, like they're mentioning regenerative farming methods for raising healthier animals that benefit the soil, and omega-3s. But, and Amy is saying that she doesn't want to be provocative and that we all do need to eat lots of veggies, but, wondering if there's a role here for some meat.
So if I may, so the issue, I think we've all agreed that potentially, it's good for people to have options. And, I think certainly Menus of Change and the Culinary Institute, have lent their imprimatur to the idea that you should be able to put together a wholesome, sustainable diet that suits you and your family and your preferences. So I think we're all supportive of that concept. So we're talking about a general theme. But when you talk about the needed change, you have to compare it to where people are now. And so, for example, the Eat Lancet Commission report, which Walter led, indicates that to get within sustainable boundaries, the modern world needs to reduce its average meat intake by something like 90%. So we really ought to be talking about less meat, less meat, less meat until we see clear signs of progress. And then we can say, and by the way, if you want to include some, that's fine. Just briefly about regenerative agriculture. So these are self-contained systems where essentially the animal components of this complete agricultural system contribute to replenishment of the soil, microorganisms in the soil. Sure, that can be a good thing. On the other hand, if you look at the food production from a regenerative system and translate that to scale, it actually translates to massively less meat consumption than currently prevails. So regenerative agriculture is not an argument against eating less meat. It would simply say that there may be place in the most productive food system to have some animal food production. And I don't think we're arguing against that, but we've got miles to go in the direction of more plants before it's time, I think, to introduce that part of the discussion. I'm looking at the chat and I see there are many more questions, but I don't want to hog the answers here.
Yeah, I think to your point, some folks are bringing up in here that Carolyn O'Neill, for example, who I know from CNN, has brought up the point that maybe people don't understand the term plant forward, and that maybe they don't see that as to being as flexible as it's meant to be. Maybe we need to make that clear. Anyone want to talk to that?
Yeah.
Maybe I will a little bit, and Chris can add to that, because I've been involved in those discussions over the years of what to call really what we're describing here. And I think it's virtually synonymous with flexitarian, which the good thing about that word, it includes flexibility. But and one of the reasons for using plant forward was to not use plant-based, because a lot of people interpreted that to mean strictly plant-based. So I sometimes use largely plant-based. It's really a question of emphasis, where our traditional eating culture in Western societies has been heavily animal-based. It's just shifting the balance and giving people lots of flexibility. People can be vegans. If you have to be careful about your food choices to have a healthy vegan diet. You can have a moderate amount of animal source proteins too, and still be within a healthful diet and be environmentally sustainable. Yeah, but that's the basic idea here. So thank you for raising that.
Actually,
Yeah,
as you can see, I want you to also talk to some of these other questions that are in the chat about your study, who funded it, and the kind of the quality of plant-based burgers and that sort of thing, if you could.
Okay, so I'll take two angles to the first question. One is, in Walter's report in Eat Lancet, there were some countries who needed to actually increase their meat intake. Mm-hmm. So if you looked globally, just from a nutritional perspective, it wasn't that everybody should cut back on red meat. It had sort of a general level, and many people were above, like the US, but some were below. The other thing I'll point out is I think the CIA has done a fabulous job of this idea of the protein flip. And the protein flip from a culinary perspective was, instead of meat at the center of the plate, plants are at the center of the plate. But this had been built off the dessert flip. The dessert flip was, instead of a huge piece of cheesecake with a raspberry on top, have a bowl of raspberries with a dollop of cheesecake on top. And when the customer says, "Where's my cheesecake?" you say, "I didn't take it away. It's still there. The cheesecake is still there. It's just a smaller proportion." And that was the idea of the protein flip. We've been so accustomed to a 6 or 10 ounce piece of meat in the middle of the plate that defines the meal. No, have this fabulous set of traditional grains and lentils with some seared vegetables and Moroccan spices and a little beef or chicken or fish on top. And so it's not gone. It could be for the vegans and vegetarians, but it's there. So I really think the CIA has done a great job of keeping that idea of it's not just dichotomized to vegan versus not vegan. So I'm trying to build on the other things people said. Moving to our study, let's be blunt. Beyond Meat funded my study. They funded it with an unrestricted gift. I'm pretty sure I couldn't get the NIH to fund that study right now. We have a lot of, the NIH budget that goes to nutrition is a drop in the bucket of all the drugs and the things that they study. So if we want nutrition studies, some of them are going to come from the food industry. And when you do that, there's different things you can do. I'll just suggest that we wrote this up in our paper. It was an unrestricted gift. So they didn't get to have any feedback on the study. They weren't involved in the design or the conduct or publication. I actually never even knew what the results were till it was published this week. There's different things as scientists that we can do, Sandy. We can submit our study design to clinicaltrials.gov at the very beginning of the study so that we don't do a fishing expedition at the end and change what we said we were looking at. So we said TMAO first and then LDL and weight and other things second. We had to stick with that. You can have an outside party analyze it. So we had a third party analyze it. You can make the data open to other people that want to ask for the data and look at the data. You can submit a statistical analysis plan and publish it ahead of time, which we did at ct.gov and Open Science Framework. So there's a number of steps that you can take. If we were only to get NIH funding, we wouldn't be able to do all the studies that were needed. If we are going to take some funding, there are many steps that we can take to increase the likelihood that this is maximally objective and unbiased. And we're pretty proud that we did the study. We thought the best we could in that manner.
Yeah, Sandy, I'd like to jump in there because I don't think Christopher should be the only one who highlights the quality of his research. It's extraordinary. And the problem you often see with industry-funded research is that you pick the winner in advance. So for example, the problem with this study, it's biased. Beyond Meat funded it. So you'd expect, okay, so we designed the Beyond Meat, the plant meat diet to be great, and the meat diet to be bad. And that's what a lot of people would do. And that's where the bias insinuates itself. It hides between the lines. Christopher never does that. They use the highest quality meat. They designed the two diets to be comparable in every way except for plant-based meat versus high quality meat. Nothing was done in putting the study together that would favor the outcome that the funder would want. And that's really what you have to worry about. It's not the funding source per se. It's does a bias reverberate through the methods? And if you do everything a meticulous researcher like Christopher does to guard against that effect, then the funding source is really just where the money comes from. And it doesn't contaminate the research. That's rare. And yeah, you do have to worry that the funding will contaminate the study, but not when Christopher Gardner's in charge. The other thing, a common theme in these the comments here, and Greg Drescher raised the issue that we're not good at nuance in our culture, and I completely agree. Everything's yes, no, good, evil, right? So if we're saying we should eat less meat, well, what about processing? Nobody said that ultra-processed food is a good thing. In fact, all the comments that Walter provided and Christopher have said, no, actually, we would favor people eating just more beans, more lentils. But, if one way to get people who really like meat to eat less is to offer them a plant-based alternative, then that can be part of the portfolio. But I think we would all agree there are two key axes that matter with regard to overall diet quality. One is a shift from animal food-centric to plant food-centric, forward, predominant, whatever words we're going to use. And the other would be a shift from ultra processed to minimally processed or whole foods. And if you move along those two axes to more whole plant foods, your diet quality improves if you measure it objectively. So it's not an either or. It's not that, if meat matters, processing doesn't. And if processing matters, meat doesn't. Actually, both matter.
Right. I was going to say that in the Mediterranean meat diet that I write about all the time, is talking about just flavoring basically foods with meat in some ways. And so that's also an option. It seems to get all kinds of awards. I have to say I write about it constantly, but I know there's all kinds of different sorts of ways. Is that one of the ways that chefs can help out? Because I noticed in some of the Culinary Institute information that people were really interested in trying out world cuisines. Is that something that can really help? Mm-hmm. Dr. Willett, why don't you speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. And again, the Mediterranean diet was enormously informative for us in so many ways over the years. And the fact that it's been studied in detail has been hugely important. For one thing, it helped us steer away from all fat is bad, because the Mediterranean diet's actually fairly high in fat compared to what people were talking about. It's about the same amount of fat, about 40% of calories compared to the traditional American diet, but the type of fat was really different. So it was a signal out there that there was something wrong with a low fat as a predominant message. But that's Mediterranean culture is just one. We have wonderful examples from many parts of the world. We, as part of our Eat Lancet report, scored diet quality for every country around the world. Interestingly, of course, Mediterranean region came out relatively well, but going in a bad direction now as it's becoming more industrialized. But Southeast Asia looked great too. And I was fortunate to visit Vietnam about a year and a half ago, and I could see why their traditional Southeast Asian diet was really rated really healthy. Not perfect. Every diet can be tuned up. They had a lot of sodium and too much white rice, but modest amounts of red meat, more vegetables and greens that I'd ever seen, even in the Mediterranean countries. Interestingly, a number of countries in Africa have really good dietary traditions. Oftentimes, so the same countries that, because they're poor, have some undernutrition problems as well. But again, tremendous variety of greens, legumes, nuts, whole grains, and wonderful flavors. So the CIA has done a fantastic job bringing traditional diets from around the world. And the good thing is that creates an incredible amount of variety, choice, flavors, exploration, excitement. So it's having these experiences has been wonderful, and CIA has been really in the leadership of learning from these different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sandy, two quick comments at the end. Just shout outs to organizations that are really helping to advance this. The Blue Zones, so 5 very diverse populations, very diverse diets, and that they all lead to people routinely living to be 100. There are variations on a common theme of wholesome foods, mostly plants, but very variable in all sorts of other ways. And the other would be Old Ways, an organization I think all of us love. Their tagline is health through heritage, and they explore the heritage-based diets of the world. And one really interesting thing is that in those parts of the world where people eat the best, derive consistent pleasure and the best health from sustainable diets, nobody is looking for news about diet because there is no news about diet. They eat the way their grandparents ate, who ate the way their grandparents ate, right? So, in some ways, the biggest news about diet, folks, there is no news about diet. These heritage-based diets really do get the job done. So we should be looking at that. And it's a chance to explore the cultures of the world into the bargain.
Right. The millennial...
I would just add that, well, can I just add a little bit? It is really important that we look at all of these traditional diets critically through a health lens and through an environmental lens, because basically, until fairly recently, people didn't have too much choice. They could only eat what they produced locally. And in some places that was not so healthy. My own traditional eating culture is from Northern Europe, and you could survive in cold climates because you had animal culture. You could kill the pigs in January. You could eat the cheese from the grazing, the cows grazing in the summer. And so and you use lots of salt because that's how you preserve food. And that, unfortunately, people eating those kinds of diets we saw 40 or 50 years ago that weren't living very long. And now we understand that diet is actually an important contributor to that. So that's the merging of science and culture that really makes this so interesting. We should look at everything critically with both the health and the environmental lens. But when we look widely, we really learn a lot. And it's exciting. The variety of what we eat now and the flavors are so much more interesting than our Northern European.
Except for heritage tomatoes. Except for heritage tomatoes, which have lost their flavor.
No, there's good parts of the Northern European diet too. And that's our job, is to pull out the good parts. There are good parts of every diet.
This plant forward is really being driven, I think, right, by the millennials and the younger generations. And a lot of that seems to be based on their, not just their wish to have more plant-based, whole-based foods, but also their concern for the environment. What can a chef do about that? I mean, we've just put, the government has required us to look at all those calories that we're consuming next to all the things that we eat now, which does stop me in my tracks quite often. Wonder what would happen if we also put on there what the environmental impact is of a particular dish.
We're working on a project now, Sandy, to try and capture simple metrics for the overall environmental footprint of diet. But I agree that may be important messaging. And gentlemen, your comments earlier about naming And so, Walter, you recommended have more than one plant protein source, and Christopher, you emphasized the importance of naming. I would add one more thing, and that would be, in effect, market segmentation. I completely agree with you. So, boomers like us may be very interested in health effects, and you tell us it's high fiber, and we get in line. But yeah, the millennials, totally different interest. They're not yet concerned about their personal health because they're young, and the best tonic with regard to health is youth. But they're very concerned about the planet and running out of one. And so, I think one of the things we could do, particularly as people access more and more information online, is, as we think about giving people access to menu information that is personalized. So, click here to learn about the environmental impact, click here to learn about health effects. And, potentially there are ways to actually curate the information about the effects on diet, so everybody can shop for the optimum through the lens they prefer. And that might be ethics, and it might be in the environment, it might be health. And I think that will be different for different audiences.
Yeah, if I can build on that, Sandy, I've been teaching a class called Food and Society at Stanford for 10 years. And it started out a long time ago due to my frustration that banging people over the head with health wasn't working, and we decided to teach a class specifically that never mentioned health. We even wrote a paper on it and published it. And to make this short, at the end of the day, there was no topic that resonated with every student. But what did resonate across all of them was at least one of climate change, animal rights and welfare, or human labor abuses that happen in slaughterhouses and the agricultural fields and the fast food industry. And so as we started talking about societal topics, a lot of students got up in arms about one thing or another. And then somebody would say, oh yeah, but for animal rights and welfare, regenerative farming and treating your animals well, this is a great idea. And so, not everybody was on one idea, and they had different spins, but as David was suggesting, if we do market segmentation and get the animal rights kids and the climate change and the social justice kids, we're getting a huge proportion of the population rather than just health.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Katie.
Hey, just wanted to jump in here quick. It's not the end, so please don't leave. We've got a couple quick words right after my little spiel here, but I wanted to let you all know what you can do on the break that's coming up right after this. Which includes continuing the conversation a little bit. So first, a big thank you to our sponsor for the break, Land O'Lakes. They're going to have a special culinary presentation that you can access in the sessions. It'll be a culinary demo that you can take a look at. We'll also have one-on-one networking if you want to do that. That's a great opportunity to connect with your peers. Sponsor booths as well with culinary demos. And as I said, we're going to do a Meet the Author with Dr. David Katz. He's not running away from us just yet. So if you want to continue the conversation, I'll post links in the chat for all of these opportunities right after this. And as a reminder, by engaging in all of these opportunities, you have a chance to win free registration and travel to Menus of Change 2021. So participate, please. So with that, I'll hand it back to Sandy for some final words.
Well, I want to thank everyone so much for joining us on this, and especially our quite esteemed group of experts. I believe we're all supposed to go around in a round robin and give ours in six words or less. What is our message to everyone? Can I start? Is that okay, Katie? All right. Don't believe everything you read, please. So, Dr. Willett, what's yours? I'll move on to Dr. Katz. Dr. Katz, what's your 6 words?
There is no news about diet.
Okay. Dr. Gardner? Have we lost folks?
Oh man, it looks like they are frozen. So I think you're all going to have to join us in Dr. Katz's booth at the beginning to do a little round robin. Oh, Walter, are you back? No. If you have your 6 words, go for them now.
Yeah. Anybody have 6 words? No.
Okay. No. Okay.
Damn, I could have had 18 words.
I know. All right. So with that, thank you all so much. It's been great chatting with all of you. I'm going to let you guys go now and wrap things up here. David, I will see you in the author booth, hopefully with many of the attendees as well. And with that, thank you all so much and enjoy your break.